Welcome to this portion of the 11th Annual Tennessee Local Food Summit. Our theme this year is the history and heritage of food and agriculture in Middle Tennessee, looking back to lead us forward. Tonight we'll hear about a few of the cultural food and farming traditions of our region, as well as some of the progressive ways we're actively working to strengthen our local food shed. After that, we'll jump into a roundtable discussion about the work being done to alleviate hunger in our community, improve land access for urban and rural farmers, and how we can continue working together to build a more equitable and sustainable food system for Middle Tennessee.
I'm Goa Peshewa, Kanapakwa Dodam, Anishinaabe Kwe. I am a native matriarch of a southeastern nation. Nashville and the Tennessee Hills will always be home to me. Tennessee was a sacred ground to many indigenous and native nations. There were the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Shawnee, Creek, the Iroquois, just to name a few. It wasn't until the late 1700s that colonial settlers began to migrate here and settled along the basin of the river. In the mid-1600s, the Iroquois started to take over Ohio, and they pushed a lot of tribes out of that area. So when we got pushed out of the Ohio Valley, our people separated into 4 different nations, and 2 of which followed the Ohio River, which turns into the Cumberland River, down to the Cherokee Nation and Tennessee. The Cherokee allowed the Shawnee to settle along the Cumberland River to kind of serve as a buffer in between the Iroquois, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee Nation. So we lived in peace that way for about 100 years. After that, deep within the wilderness of Tennessee is when settlers began to come down, and they started to set up camp, and then they decided that they wanted to own this land. So eventually, colonialism took over all of Kentucky, parts of Virginia, and parts of Tennessee. A lot of displacement for Native people originated obviously from colonialism in general. Most eastern woodland tribes depended on agriculture and used a lot of companionship planting processes. So at that point it was a lot of different organisms that would work together to do the work for you. So when you think of companion planting, one that is still used to this day is the 3 sisters, which is corn, beans, and squash. And they all help each other. Where the corn stalk grows, the beans can lift up, the beans aerate the soil for the corn, and then the squash kind of cover the roots for everything so that it stays moist underneath. Our land varied from forests to wetlands to farmland. So a lot of our natural resources were year-round and were collected throughout, venturing throughout those different parts of the land. To indigenous people, stewardship has always meant that you don't own the land, and instead that you are in cyclical nature with the land and you're caretakers of the land. So because indigenous people are using the land and relying on the land, they're also incorporating processes into their existence that feeds the land and helps the land, nurtures the land. So when it comes to a lot of the foraging and the diversity of these ecosystems and learning what was readily available to us, we were also incorporating cycles of rebirth and harboring these plants and uplifting their existence, as well as our own use of them, if that makes sense. Ceremonies were tied to the agriculture cycle. We would have the spring bread dance, which was at planting time. We would have the green corn dance, which was when the crops ripened, and the autumn bread dance, which was to celebrate the harvest. We had a lot more diversity of the land at that point. We had a lot more land, so we had a lot more diversity of the land, and that includes the valleys, that includes the farmland, that includes the woods and the forest, that includes the mountains and the riverways, the wetlands, all of these different kinds of ecosystems that are already existing and thriving. And it was kind of, in season with each of those and what we could find at those times. My current project is Neon Moon, which is a Native initiative here in Nashville. This was created to give our community an easy, convenient way to be able to support Indigenous peoples by catering to the industries that we're already tied to, with music industry, entertainment industry, hospitality industry, and all of these businesses here. Our community, we wanted to give them a way to be able to support something within their community as easy as buying a cup of coffee, as easy as putting coffee into their businesses or their home offices or everything like that.
Hi, I'm Alice Randall. I'm an activist, a cookbook writer, and a professor at Vanderbilt University, where I serve as professor, writer in residence, and Mellon Chair in the Humanities, with a real focus on soul food, Southern food, American and global foodways, as well as food justice. I'd love to give you a little background on Soul Food Love. Soul Food Love is a cookbook my daughter, Caroline Randall Williams, and I wrote, and it documents 100 years of cooking and eating in one Black family. And what's relevant to this summit is that two of the kitchens that we document, Joan Bontemps Williams's kitchen and Alberta Bontemps' kitchen, both happened here in Nashville. My daughter is Caroline Randall Williams. Her mother is me, Alice Randall, who also has a Nashville kitchen. So I guess there's actually a third Nashville kitchen in the story. Her grandmother was Joan Williams, who's an extraordinary cookbook collector. And she was also the chief cook for the Nashville Civil Rights Movement. Her mother was Alberta Bontemps, who was married to Arna Bontemps, the poet. And she was an extraordinary Seventh-day Adventist vegetarian cook and an extraordinary Black club woman chef. Soul Food Love also includes my grandmother's kitchen, which lived in Detroit, Michigan, and before that, outside of Selma, Alabama. It's a kitchen memoir, a cooking memoir, full of all the trauma and transcendence of the Black kitchen, all the magic and all the difficulties that have to be transcended because of those grandmothers that I just spoke to of, both dear, the grandmother with the kitchen in Detroit, and Grandma Bontemps, the Adventist cook, were conceived in kitchen rapes when their mothers were domestic servants working in a Southern kitchen and were raped doing their job. I have said in Soul Food Love, we have spoken to the truth that in the land of strange fruit, trees look different. Farm to table feels different when you have farmed enslaved, when you're cooking and maybe had been conceived when your mother was cooking and she was raped, that all of this is much more difficult. This whole urban chicken phenomena needs to understand that it occurs within a context in which Black people have been called coons as a negative word, only second to the N word that we can't say. But a coon is short for raccoon, chicken thief. Black people have been stigmatized around chicken in extraordinary ways. And so when you are gentrifying and you move next to a Black family that worked hard to get out of the rural acres into the city, and you bring this chicken coop and this chicken right next to them without any kind of conversation, you may be triggering them in very, very profound ways. And not unintentionally, but we must be intentional about knowing the history. And that's why I'm so excited about this conference. There's a wonderful African phrase, Sankofa, to look back, to move forward. And I am thrilled to be here in the spirit of Sankofa, to look back at the history of Nashville foodways, to move forward progressively with Nashville foodways. Let me stop for one moment to just say that when we came over from Africa, Black people, our language groups were often disrupted. So people would be put together. Africa is a vast continent next to people who did not share the same language. We often did not get to bring our paintings and our sculptures with us, but we could bring our foodways, the art and culture that traveled with us from Africa to the United States, largely were our foodways. And partially because some of our food knowledge and growing knowledge was needed and could be exploited, our knowledge of rice culture, our knowledge of many different foodways, that this was something that was preserved as opposed to destroyed because it was useful. Yeah. And some, we don't know if these stories are completely true, but there are many stories handed down that mothers would sometimes hide seeds, bene seeds, other seeds in their hair to bring a taste of their old world with them to their new world. What is really different about Nashville and Tennessee is that vegetarian movements are very important to Tennessee. Seventh-day Adventists, and particularly Black Seventh-day Adventists, play an incredibly powerful role in establishing all American vegetarian movements. In 1870, we're going to get the very first Adventist cookbook, the Health Reformers Progressive Cookbook. This is 1870. So the very same time they're starting that movement, to missionary movement to address Black folks in Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee, they're publishing this very important cookbook of all vegetarian recipes. So we are a center of Black vegetarianism and a treasure trove of Black vegetarian recipes. I will also note that George Washington Carver focused so much of his work on the sweet potato and peanut vegetarian staples. And in this whole notion of looking back to move forward, vegetarian movements and vegetarian restaurants and vegetarian home cooking are at the center of the 21st century Southern table and the Tennessee table. I am so thrilled to be one of the old heads welcoming all the new voices to this table. I'm also thrilled to be one of the Southerners welcoming the flavors and aesthetics and ingredients of all the new arrivals to Nashville, to Tennessee, who only make our table richer, our story more significant. We look back to move forward, but we hope that the future is absolutely better than the past. I want the next bite to be the best bite, and that happens by inviting everybody into the kitchen and everybody to the table.
My name is Sandor Katz. I live in Cannon County, about 65 miles southeast of Nashville. I call myself a fermentation revivalist, and I've written several books about fermented foods and beverages. And really, I am an itinerant fermentation teacher, and that's been the central focus of my life for nearly 20 years now. Everybody everywhere eats and drinks products of fermentation every day, but over the last century, as food production has disappeared from many people's lives and disappeared to factories and centralized facilities, many people have come to imagine that fermentation is highly technically demanding, or you need a laboratory, you need to be a microbiologist, you need a lab, you need a microscope, and nothing could be further from the truth. Fermentation's not rocket science. People have been fermenting for thousands of years, with kitchens, much less well equipped than your 21st century kitchen or anyone's. The indigenous people of this region, certainly were practicing fermentation. I've been able to learn about some Cherokee traditions in my first book, Wild Fermentation. I include a recipe called Gunahena, which is a Cherokee sour corn beverage made by fermenting corn. there are vibrant Cherokee traditions of fermenting whole ears of corn in a brine. There are fermented corn breads. There certainly are indigenous fermentation traditions in this region, some of which I have been able to learn about, and I suspect many more that I have not learned anything specifically about. And then, of course, every wave of settlers brought their own, fermentation ideas, or in some cases, maybe figured out new ones. So, all of the old timers who I've ever met here in Canning County, where I live, whose, sort of families were trying to sustain themselves off of the land, they all had sauerkraut going. They were all, making their own alcoholic beverages, sometimes out of squashes, sometimes out of persimmons, but out of different kinds of carbohydrate-rich foods, which people could grow here. Imagine how important fermentation has been for food preservation, because I mean, presumably anyone who could be watching this video has a refrigerator and a freezer in their home. But those technologies, didn't exist before the 20th century. Then we could think about something like canning, which, many of us were introduced to by a grandparent or even a great grandparent or someone else who was older. And so we think of that as an old timey method of food preservation. And I mean, I can tomatoes, I can things. I have nothing against canning, but we have to recognize that canning is a relatively new technology. It was invented in the early 19th century, just 200 years ago in France by a man named Nicolas Appert. So if you go back 200 years, there's no freezer, there's no refrigerator, there's no canning, there's no chemical preservatives, and basically the two effective means of food preservation that were widespread were drying and fermentation. As this region becomes more and more diversified with people migrating from different parts of the world and making their homes here, we have a richer and richer range of different kinds of fermentation traditions which are practiced here.
My first venture into the Long Hungry Valley was in 1972. My brother had just bought a farm here. And my father and I parked our car about a mile upstream and started walking down this road where we had to cross the stream. We'd take our shoes off, or it was Christmas at the time. And then we walked further and crossed the stream another 5 times or something, and came across a man in a field plowing with a horse. And we asked if John lived up the road, and he said, yeah, next house up. And that was my introduction here. And these people had lived there since 1916 on 3 acres and grew all their own food and a tobacco crop. And many people back then did that. They cooked with a wood cook stove, had root cellars, had animals, slaughtered a pig, salted it down, had meat for the winter. Chickens and all kinds of livestock. They made corn and hay crops to feed the animals, and they canned a lot of food and put it up. Eventually, people freezers came in, and people started freezing food and such as that. So it was a quite self-sufficient situation, not different from almost anywhere in the world at any given time. And there were places to sell crops besides tobacco. And there was a green bean cannery in Lafayette and a strawberry place in Portland. And there was these places to move farm produce. What we found back then was just wonderful, really intelligent people who knew how to do all this stuff. And willing to share, and so that really made the journey worthwhile. The question is, what happened to the canneries? And the answer has to do with post-World War II societal changes, which were of a movement away from small, self-sufficient family farms towards people going somewhere and getting a job, and then going and getting the grocery store. There weren't any super grocery stores before the end of World War II. They just didn't have them. And by having those things, then people think, well, I'll just go get a job and I go to the grocery store and I don't have to do all this farm work, and gardening and canning and all that stuff. And so it just kind of fell out of favor because there was these jobs, and we're a booming economy. Of course, this is at the expense of poor indigenous people worldwide. And it sort of just kept going that way until today. We have a very volatile situation with extremely few people knowing how agriculture works, and of course everybody's still being dependent on that, and a lot of weird scientific ideas to solve food problems that really shut down all the grocery stores and people would start gardening again, and that would solve all the problems right there. So. And another thing I figured out that I thought was really telling was this little county I live in, about 20,000 people when I was figuring this 30 years ago. And I liked growing potatoes, as you know. And if I figured out that 20,000 people would be 5,000 families that might spend a couple dollars a week on potatoes, and I sort of did this math and came up with like this $500,000 is spent on potatoes in this little county, and all that $500,000 leaves. I mean, I was getting, my few $10,000 worth, my acre or whatever, but I could have, if we just had a tariff at the borders, and any potato that came into the county, there was a tariff on it, our people would grow those potatoes locally. And that's how countries and communities used to do this stuff. You didn't take cheap English barley into Germany without paying a big price.
So my name is Seema Prasad. I have Miel Restaurant, what we are now. We've been open since September of 2008. We are a farm-to-table neighborhood kind of refined bistro that is fully focused on sustainability in both the food products that we bring in as well as our practices. So as a restaurant owner, I get to make some of the decisions, but honestly, a lot of it falls on my chef. I have created the structure of we compost, we recycle, we preserve water, we try and serve reasonable portions so that we're not throwing a lot away. So I was raised in a family where my grandmother grew a lot of the food for our family. She grew up on a farm. She ended up living in the city, but had 3 city lots that she farmed and gardened and had fruit trees. And in Seattle, Washington, we had kiwis and we had cabbage and potatoes and apples and apricots and plums and pears. Like, it was crazy how much this little 3 city lot plot produced for us. We weren't allowed to not compost. Like, we had to compost. It was like religion in our family. Like, it was sacrilege to throw something in the trash. You wouldn't do that. It's nutrients that go back into your soil. So when we started the restaurant, there was not a composting service. Compost Nashville did not exist. And so I took our compost in 5-gallon buckets out to what is now Green Door Gourmet. Wasn't Green Door then, and that's where I farmed for the restaurant with Sylvia. And once I ceased farming for the restaurant, because all these amazing farmers came to life in Middle Tennessee, which I was so happy about, I didn't have a place to send the food waste. So thankfully, Beetle started, Compost Company started, everyone kind of got on board. About 30%, not food waste, but 30% of what we send to the landfill is organic matter that could be digested, composted, and put back into our land and made into renewable energy. 1/5 of the food that we buy in Nashville and in the country, so think 5 bags of groceries coming from the store or from your CSA, 5 bags of food. One of them, just drop it in the parking lot and you just don't even go back for it. You just waste that. I paid for it, I worked to pay for it, I shopped for it, I bagged it, and I dropped it and I just kept walking. We waste that much. at the same time as we have, and I don't know the exact stat, but significant amount of people, and a lot of them children, that are food insecure. But connecting the dots, we can connect the dots. So we have extra food. There are last mile organizations we can get it to, like the Mission downtown, like the Nashville Food Project. We have, when you glean a farm, you have all this excess. There are people that will use it and they'll get it to the people that do need it. Customers are who support it, but it's our job to educate the customer and what they are eating. So for example, I could serve lettuce from a farm in Central Valley of California, which seems super silly because of the carbon footprint and everything else, like, and how old is it by the time it gets here? Or I could serve it from like 10 different local farmers that are growing beautiful greens right now. And we're supporting our local economy. We're creating a closed loop economy and supporting kind of our farm community. If we're not creating like a really stable, growing community, what happens when we don't have gas, or when we don't, like, we need to keep it local. We can definitely provide more food security for our community by supporting a local food system. When we support local farmers and what they're doing, and be that the land trust providing land, be it education, be it community supported agriculture, to make sure that those farmers have those finances ahead of time so that they can support the farming activities that then support and nourish us, we are building a food system. When we value farmland over development, we're supporting a food system. When we participate in purchasing, just as a consumer or even as a restaurant, we're supporting a food system that is very valuable for the long run and supports our environment.
I'm Charlie Hatcher, Tennessee Commissioner of Agriculture, also 10th generation American farmer and 6th generation Tennessee farmer. Yeah. So the first Hatcher came over in 1635 to Jamestown, Virginia. And in 1814, my great grandparents moved to Williamson County. And in 1831, they acquired a portion of the land on the farm that my family lives on today. Regenerative agriculture, it's kind of a popular word and phrase, but the fact is that farmers have been regenerative from the beginning. Now, we know that there's things that we can do to in our practices to improve on our carbon footprint, on our carbon sequestration, and agriculture in general and forestry has reduced their carbon footprint over the last decade. I can't quote the exact percent, but by a bunch. But we can get better. And the conferences that I go to, the farmers that we talk to, the stakeholder meetings that we have, we talk about it all the time. In fact, Tennessee has the highest use of no-till for crop acreages in the United States. And so Tennessee farmers are doing a lot to be regenerative. We can do better. And we know that, but really the solution to the environment and to climate change are the only two industries that can sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and you know what they are. They're agriculture and forestry. One of my top priorities and one of the governor's top priorities is soil and water conservation, as well as ag and forestry and land preservation. We got a big challenge ahead of us because Tennessee is the most moved to state in the United States. We've got people like Tennessee. We've got people moving in. We've got companies moving in. So our big challenge is going to be, how can we keep agriculture the number one industry? And it is. It's the number one industry in Tennessee. And we want it to be the number one industry in 10 years so that we have those rapidly growing plants and trees. So there's a long-standing producer cost share program called Ag Enhancement in Tennessee. Highly successful, poured millions of dollars into every county in the state. And it's a cost share program. And it incentivizes no-till practices. It incentivizes cost share programs. We've started a new program this year for beginning farmers, for small farmers that don't have the acreage, don't have the equipment. They're exempt from our minimums so that they can start a farming operation no matter what size and still get money to do that. And so we're leveraging state resources, we're leveraging federal resources, and Tennessee has we used $50 million on our first wave of CARES money to assist and help ag and forestry business owners with COVID losses. And we were informed 2 weeks ago, we got another $50 million. So we're going to be putting $100 million in ag and forestry businesses in Tennessee to assist with COVID, to strengthen the supply chain. We know there's lack of diversity in agriculture in general. There's lack of diversity in agriculture in Tennessee. There's lack of diversity, racial diversity, even within many of the departments. I'm aware of it. It's one of my priorities. We've had discussions on it. Our plan is to, I've looked at what some other states are doing. Pennsylvania's done a whole study I've talked to the Secretary of Agriculture there about what he's doing, and we're taking some of those ideas, and it's our intent to have a diversification plan and program in place with a dedicated diversification director by the end of 2022. So we know there's opportunities in urban areas for agriculture. We're concentrating on that. We are working on, and we're making a lot of progress on what we're calling fusion centers. We hope to create one at Ellington Ag Center where the department's based, and we're working with Mayor Cooper in Nashville to have the first of its type of a fusion center, I'm calling it, to bring gardening and growing plants and fruits and vegetables and trees in an urban setting for low access, low income communities, so that we can give them access to a garden, teach them how to grow foods. It's one of our priorities, and we've prioritized soil and water conservation and urban gardening and urban agriculture and access to food and ag education for low access, low income communities. Pandemic brought great awareness to the local foods. I mean, the local food movement is here to stay. It's gaining momentum. It's stronger. People realize I think people want to know where their food comes from. We saw a great increase in the sale of local produce and fruits and vegetables and milk and meat. And we made a concerted effort through Pick Tennessee Products. That's one of our promotional sites where you can go and see where products are grown and produced and made in Tennessee, and our department works with that to try to promote that. But we've been intentional about that, and we want to try to leverage and continue to push local foods, because it's, the added value of agritourism and the added value of any farm product that you can sell off the farm directly to the consumer is a good thing. I mean, we have to be, and we want to be more self-sufficient in Tennessee. I mean, we saw it when the pandemic hit, when the meat shelves were bare and we didn't have enough meat processing facilities. And so we took 20% of that first $50 million in CARES money and put it to meat processing. I mean, we've seen record sales in almost all areas, and it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to ride the local food movement and ride it all we can, because the reality is when you add value and when you can sell more product locally, that may keep a farmer in business. But y'all can help us through education and directing people toward, state and federal cost share programs and supporting the local food movement. We've got a good opportunity here. I think working on it together that we can make real progress.
We hope you enjoyed that presentation. Next up, we've got a roundtable discussion featuring some of Middle Tennessee's leaders doing incredibly important work. We'll hear from Bianca Morton of the Nashville Food Project, Mark Etherly of the Metro Nashville Human Relations Commission, Caroline Hutchins of Sounding Stone Farm, and Persian cookbook author and chef Louisa Shafia. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the live chat or the comment section below. Don't forget to follow us on social media at TN Local Food and check out our website, tnlocalfood.com. Okay, all right. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for participating in this discussion about the future of food in Middle Tennessee. Just to get started, I thought we could go around the circle and everybody could do an introduction, maybe your name, what you do, and how local food is relevant to your work. So we could start with Louisa.
Hi, I am Louisa Shafia. I am a local cookbook author and chef and gal about town. I do a lot of work with the immigrant and refugee community here in Nashville, Tennessee. I work with the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition to help put on fundraisers and events that help people know about their work and also really invite people to understand the food of different cultures around the world, because we actually have such a diverse community here of immigrants from around the world. Yes.
Thanks. Mark?
I'm Mark Etherly. I'm the Director of Operations and Special Projects for the Metro Human Relations Commission. The commission is the government entity basically for Nashville that does civil and human rights work. Our interest, unlike my three co-panelists here, I do not cook or prepare or grow food that nourishes people. The best thing I do with food is eat it. But my focus is on food policy and how it can address health, economies, education, poverty in neighborhoods that are historically underserved and disempowered. And so that's where we come. It's from an equity and justice perspective. That's where we're coming at this work.
Bianca?
Hi, I am Chef Bianca Morton Hughes. I am the Director of Meals for the Nashville Food Project. I've been in this position for a little over 3 years, and my main objective is to get healthy, nutritious meals out into underserved communities. These are the communities of people that don't have access to local or healthy food. These are communities that are in food deserts. We are speaking to different communities that suffer from homelessness, that are dealing with new immigrants and new Americans and refugees. So our goal is to reach people and promote community through food. So a big part of this conversation is how can we better utilize those resources so that we are creating a more sustainable food system as well as servicing the needs of the community.
Thank you. Caroline?
My name is Caroline Hutchins, and I am the owner-operator of Sounding Stone Farm, which is a small, not certified organic, but follow organic practices farm in Jolton, Tennessee. I sell at the Richland Park Farmers Market and also to some restaurants. I am also helping organize the Tennessee Local Food Summit this year. One of the main reasons I got into farming is because I'm really passionate about fixing our very broken food system. So this sort of work that we're doing really matters to me, and that's why I'm helping out with the food system and really interested to hear what these other folks on the panel today have to say.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. So to just jump in, I thought maybe the way we could start the conversation was talking about land access, because pretty much anyone that you talk to, whether it's urban farmers or farmers that are growing in rural communities, land access is a huge issue all over the country and beyond. And I'm wondering if anybody has anything to add to that and kind of models of creative land access that they want to share that are in existence, that we hope for in the future, yeah, just to address that issue of land access.
I'm happy to jump in really quick and talk about the Agrarian Commons, which is a national organization that helps connect landowners with farmers. They buy up land from retiring farmers or families, and then they give farmers long-term leases on that land. They're working with farmers who might not otherwise be able to access large tracts of land. I mean, land is insanely expensive in general, and in Middle Tennessee, it really is getting expensive. So organizations like that are important. They're starting their work in Tennessee, and I'm really excited to see where they go.
I'll just kind of piggyback on that in the to say that we one of our programs is focusing on this stories of the land, and I think that really grasps that concept about access. When you're looking at just the different communities of people, that how the different rules and all the policies, how they affect that access, and looking for ways to be able to tap into that and garner that. Because I think that it teaches us that we have some accountability for our resources so that we can be good stewards, and also a sense of pride and also like financial stability. And I think those are some of the key factors that opening up more access to more people and making it more equitable and affordable will garner those other tiers.
I'm curious, does anyone here have a good sense of the community gardens in the Metro Nashville area? How active are they? How do people participate in them?
I would say with the Nashville Food Project, we have a lot of community gardeners, and they are very active, but you have to look at a lot of different factors of when they can commit to that time, because a majority of the people that are working these land, they work full time. This is not something that they can devote like 10 hours a day to. They actually have to work so they can provide in other facets. But what we're seeing is these community of farmers are actually coming together. Because of the pandemic, we changed how our community gardens looked. So where we had farmers that were just growing their own things, we streamlined it so that this farmer is growing tomatoes and they're sharing it with all the other community gardeners, so that we can create some more like that access all across the board. I think that's the biggest hurdle, is the time factor included in that. If you're doing it for a living, like our new American farmers with our Growing Together program, we're teaching that skill. We're giving them that chance to like sell to local farms, local restaurants, and Grow Together Nashville, or Nashville Grown. But when you're looking at it as you're giving people their first look at farming, and they're trying to raise community and offset some of the local costs in the grocery stores and other places to have access to these foods, they don't have the time. So these are things that are done after hours. They're done on the weekends, and it's not the number one priority. So even when I'm doing like food demonstrations for different groups to show them how to cook with the foods that they're growing, a problem that we're having is I've already worked a full day. I do this all day, every day, but they're not available until like 5, 6 o'clock p.m. So that means extending ourselves beyond our day-to-day so that we can help give them the tools that they need. But they are very active. I know that, Middle Tennessee especially is lacking a lot of green space, but the areas that they're starting to pop up and gain popularity, I think the communities are really rallying with that and all being, they're all like jumping in and participating in whatever way they can.
Getting to a few of the points that you all made, especially the question about models in other cities or states. Seattle has the Pea Patch program, which is more of a centralized community and urban farming platform where it's actually run through the government. So you can basically find the closest community garden in your neighborhood and sign up and get education about gardening, all through kind of one portal. Louisa, to your question, I've helped groups develop community gardens over the years. And it's sort of like a hodgepodge kind of landscape where there's a lot of people interested in doing it. But as Bianca was saying, it's hard for people to organize around it, especially when they have a lot of things going on in their lives and trying to work and raise families and stuff like that. So the infrastructure just isn't there to support people starting and running gardens or urban farms. Nonprofits tend to be the ones who step in, like Food Project. I think Food Project has one of the only models of utilizing metro property. I mean, there's a lot of like floodplain property that community organizations utilize. But I think Food Project's like the first one to utilize like a parks program or parks land in that the Antioch community where Growing Together is. And to me, that's promising that Metro is willing to use land that way, because we have tons of land as far as the government goes. We're a city, but technically we're this massive county as well. So we have land in the outlying areas, especially. So if we could chart that course and use more public land for farming, I mean, I think we just are about to buy 10 new acres in like the Tusculum area. So if we could try to have more purpose around utilizing this land for urban farming and gardening and to address food access, that would be amazing.
I want to plug to Louisa's question. There's a new group. I might get the name wrong. I think it's the Nashville Community Gardens Coalition. And they are really coming together and forming a structure so that anyone that's interested in starting a community garden or is looking to access resources for their community garden has a place to go. So again, I might have that name wrong, but that is formed. Is that the correct name, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And yeah, you guys both touched on so many important points. Just to piggyback on Mark, your point about Metro Nashville land, I know that I think there have been a lot of hurdles from what I understand about working with Metro land because you can't sell the food.
You see Bianca shaking her head like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what we do about that, but that's a huge problem that obviously has to be addressed.
That's a lot of red tape. I think that's something that I feel like I don't know all the details of it because I'm kind of a little removed from that aspect, but lots of hurdles and a lot of red tape and to go through, like even with like we're trying to expand and develop that land a little bit better so that we can offer more opportunities. So and I think that we are hitting some tough conversations and a little pushback, and so it becomes a more time inclusive type of conversation. So I'm interested to see what this new year brings and how quickly we can move forward with the next steps of that, even though that stuff that was outlined in the very beginning, we're finding that we're having to kind of revisit and go back and relook at it because of different red tape and legislator.
The biggest, I think, one of the biggest problems is that Metro gets treated as this sort of, or seen as sort of this monolith, where Metro is one thing. Metro is more like 65 things because that's generally how many departments there are. So certain departments have certain policies around how they use land and how they might permit land versus other departments. And so from a policy perspective, it would be nice if there was sort of a general process for permitting land that departments manage. So I think that's a nice way of talking about what Bianca is saying.
Yeah, so I mean, at the least we can see that there is so much potential in utilizing Metro land if we can work towards policies that make it accessible for farmers. I wanted to touch on the incredible and expanding immigrant and refugee community in Middle Tennessee, and what those people have to offer, those farmers and gardeners have to offer to our local food community. I think we think about like local food that is traditionally grown here, but I think small farmers and growers have a lot to learn from those communities. Does anybody have anything they'd like to share about that?
Well, I just happen to have by my desk something from the New American Economy, which is a nonprofit that supports immigrants. Anyway, it says Nashville's food and restaurant industry, 25% of chefs and cooks are immigrants, 20% of food workers, 17% of restaurant managers, 8% of waiters and waitresses, and 8% of cashiers are all immigrants. So it's just so interesting because as someone that lives in Nashville and, I live in East Nashville, but I do a lot of things around Antioch where there's more of the immigrant population is living. I feel like there's almost like two Nashvilles and they almost don't seem to know about each other. And there are so many immigrants here and from all around the world, and there's so many different languages spoken here and so many different kinds of food to experience if you can go out and find these restaurants and markets and businesses run by immigrants. But I feel like we definitely have some work to do in terms of integrating immigrants and refugees into the rest of the city population and just having them, even have a conversation.
Does anybody have are there some programs or which programs or organizations are really doing that work of connecting these, particularly the growers and farmers, people that are in agriculture and food? Are there organizations doing that work, and how can we support them?
I know that Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition is doing a lot with trying to introduce the rest of the city to immigrant-owned food businesses. They do a thing that's called the Nashville, the food crawl, where you get a ticket and every business that you visit is immigrant-run, whether it's a market or a restaurant. In terms of growing, maybe someone else can answer that better. Maybe Bianca.
I'm not a gardener, but I know that Nashville Grown is like really creating a good network to connect local restaurants with those individuals. I will also say that Rethink is a partner that we're working with. It's a new partnership that kind of spanned out of the pandemic, where they kind of partner immigrant or ethnic food service with like nonprofits and other places where they're able to, we get meals for them, and which kind of increases our capacity to send more meals out and support those types of local businesses. That's about, it is a lot. I know that like Casa Asa France has some wonderful programs as well. And I think the biggest thing is working with those communities like the Turk and everywhere else that are like trying to continue that conversation and open the door to make it more relevant all across the board.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Rethink. I've met a couple of caterers, immigrant business owners who do catering, who are participating in the Rethink program, which is food boxes for people in the community who need, a food donation. So it's really been so great to see some of that business go out to these immigrant-run catering businesses so they can, help their businesses survive during this pandemic, and then also help provide food for people in need. That's pretty great. It's really special that synergy has actually come together in Nashville.
Well, think that I'm particularly working with Chef Carla Ruiz,
Yes.
Carla's Catering.
Yes.
And that really came out of the need, the fact that with the pandemic, I couldn't have volunteers. And how we operated previously was that we facilitated volunteers helping us produce the meals. And when COVID hit and there were no volunteer sessions, I had to take a staff that was not like commercial kitchen. They weren't chefs. They weren't people that had been working in hospitality that can easily go in and bang out these meals. So we had to rethink what that looked like. So when we pivoted, and now my staff is the one that's actually producing the meals, we also don't have time or the capacity to do as many meals as we wanted to do. It looked differently. So partnering with communities like Rethink and being partnered with Chef Carla, we were able to get an additional 1,000 meals that come into our kitchen that I could serve communities on top of what we're already doing. So if I'm already doing 1,200 to 1,500 meals a day, and then you add on additional 1,000 meals for that week, we were able to keep her business afloat. We were able to it was people that I was gonna have to turn away. Like, I can't do sandwiches for 250 people because of the amount of time that it takes. So partners that needed more of that type of style support, we were able to offer them these meals and this service. So that's been a partnership that we've been doing for at least almost a year now. So, and that's a great way to connect those two communities, because otherwise, what type of applications or when will we see that? They tend to have their own communities, and they build those up within themselves. But giving everyone else who wouldn't necessarily have access to them an opportunity to see what they're able to do and produce and taste their food from their viewpoint. I think it creates many facets for us to be able to relate to one another.
Yes, for sure. I spoke with Carla Ruiz, Chef Carla, about her participation in Rethink. And so, so she's from, I believe it's Mexico originally. Mm-hmm. So it's so cool. And then, as you said, a lot of times these people are working in their own little economies that are off the grid because some people aren't legal. So that's kind of their only choice. So that's another challenge. But it's so great to see how it's worked in this context.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all that and for talking about those partnerships and collaborations. I think something that we've learned at the Tennessee Local Food Summit over the past few years is that so many different organizations are working in silos. And so I think that the more examples and the more that we're sharing resources for who we're working with and how we're working together can really only have positive, results. So Bianca, you were talking about the meals that you're preparing each week. I mean, I know that the pandemic has changed things, but you are serving an incredible amount of people every week. It's kind of unbelievable. And like you said, in conjunction with partners, meal partners, I was wondering if you could talk about how do local foods factor into that? I mean, if you're using a lot of local food, so that has to affect your menu and how you prepare foods for all these different groups of people. How do you make that food culturally relevant and meet the needs of so many different groups?
That's a big question. I always start off by telling people that my job is kind of like being on Chopped every single day. Because since I'm doing a lot of, I deal with donations a lot and recovering food so that it does not become waste. I don't know what I'm going to get all the time. So sometimes we know and we can plan, and then sometimes we just have things that just drop in our lap and we have to figure out the highest best use of those items in a short amount of time. So one thing that I do is I'm very vague. We also get, since we're able to subsidize a lot of our meals that go out, and we get reimbursement from federal government with CACFP, I have to adhere to the strict guideline of how these meals have to look in terms of the nutritious value that it goes into that. So other than that, I'm really vague. I don't specify what the vegetable is. I use words like chef's choice and vegetable medley so that I can funnel in those resources as they come. Also, it allows me to pivot That was our word for, I think, 2020, 2021, and it's going to be our word for 2022. So to pivot, I'm not tied down to something. So that flexibility allows us to be able to use those resources as we get them. But I recently, I think last year, we did a study with Vanderbilt just to see where our meals stacked up against the meals that MNPS and other places were providing. So that flexibility, that influx of fresh meals allowed us kind of to blow them out the water. But I try to be as creative as possible. We do surveys as well. When we're taking on new communities and new programs that are looking for food support, we try to get a good insight about their demographics prior to us actually sending them meals. I can't give everybody what they want when they want. I let people know quite freely, this is not Burger King and you can't have it your way. But I try to be very intentional so that we try to have a wide spectrum of different meals throughout the week so that it appeals, especially those that are getting meals 5 days out of the week, that it kind of appeals to all people. I include at least a minimum of 1 vegetarian meal. I limit pork meals to once a week, only because now with the changing demographics and with immigrant and new American communities, a lot of them come from faiths that don't allow them to eat pork. Although pork is something that is heavily donated, that is I'm stacked up with ham and pork loins in the freezer, but I can only use it sparingly. But I try to make sure that we actually do research. We do that groundwork and that legwork to find more about the communities that we're going to be serving. What do they like? What they don't like? What seems to be, we do surveys. Sometimes the feedback is hard to hear because not only is it about providing a nutritious meal, but we're also trying to expose people to food that they don't have access to. I can say now that people are not big fans of kale and butternut squash, but guess what happens in my world is that when I get 250 pounds of butternut squash dropped off, you're getting butternut squash. But finding just different creative ways to take traditional, non-traditional spins on traditional meals and infusing those local fruits and vegetables that people wouldn't normally see. They wouldn't go buy that. They don't know how to use it. They don't know how to work at it. But then giving them that kind of information and putting those in meals that they can recognize so that they'll be more apt to try that on a different, when they're on their own. We really do try to be intentional and making sure that we're served given a variety of different things. We might have a Korean beef bowl. I can't tell you what's going to be in it because it's going to depend on what comes in that week. But some of our communities can recognize that Asian inspired dish. We just did yesterday a pulled turkey enchilada casserole where we, got a whole bunch of turkeys after Christmas, go figure. But we were able to include, we do hit a lot of Latin and Hispanic communities. So that's something that's going to be very familiar for those individuals. And it's also those who aren't familiar, it gives them a different, look into things in different cultures. Since all of our partners are pretty diverse. I don't even know if I answered the question.
Chef Bianca, I've had some of the Rethink meals and they've been really good.
Yay. And so that's another thing. When some of the Rethink meals that we've been doing with Carla, we try to gear those partners that we feel like her meals would connect better with. And, we not without having our own hardships and hurdles is, I encourage Carla, don't rethink the wheel. Do what you do best. You don't have to try to dumb it down for the rest of us. Let what you do best and how you cook shine, because these are the partners that can really appreciate, give them a taste of home and a more authentic taste than maybe they're getting with the meals that I provide. So that's the basis of how we do it. Trust me, I'm having to have more conversations with partners to give them a better understanding about the Nashville Food Project. So because then they're more apt to try new things. When the kids were like, we don't want it, we want hot dogs, pizza, and burgers, that's costly. And with the pandemic, sometimes I'm not sure what I'm going to have access to. Donations were like, they took a back seat. Cost of goods increased, but I was able to run under my budget probably by a good 20% for the last year and a half by utilizing the things that we're getting on donation and being creative in how we're getting it and infusing it in the meals. So it's a hit or miss, but I think ultimately it allows us to what's the word I think ultimately allows us to bring people together, whether or not they're talking about they liked the meal or they didn't like the meal, or I've never had this before, and having the conversations about where this stuff comes from. Why is it important that the meals, everything we have is full of vegetables and rainbows and colors, and that access, and giving them that better outlook and understanding. It's I'm not buying a whole bunch of food. I'm plain chopped every single day so that I can figure out how do I make this taste good and look good and give you something to talk about later.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so incredible that the National Food Project and Rethink and so many other organizations are doing the work of getting not just food into the hands of people that need it, but healthy food that's good for their bodies. And I know that for small farmers, well, farming isn't really very profitable unless you're doing it obviously on an industrial scale. So I wondered, Caroline, if you could kind of share, how do you walk that line of meeting your, you have costs to cover, but you want your food to be accessible. I mean, that is really challenging. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that challenge, and what are some ways that you've found to walk that line more gracefully?
Yeah, it is. It's so tough. And I think about this all the time. I remember when I started my farm in my first year, I was like, I am going to give away 10% of everything that I grow, first, not seconds. That was my goal. And that was a really noble goal. And then push came to shove, and that wasn't able, I just wasn't able to fulfill that because I wasn't able to make enough money, basically. I mean, this is my livelihood, and I have to be able to, pay my mortgage and pay my bills and do all those things that your job needs to provide for you. And yeah, profit margins in farming are very, very low. And farming is a game of scale, like you said. So where you make money farming is when the bigger your scale, the easier it is to make money. The more resources you have coming into it. If you've inherited land, if you've inherited a farm, those people are set up to make the most money farming. And so when it comes to trying to provide food to people at a fair cost, I have learned that we farmers, especially farmers like me, first generation farmers who didn't inherit land or a farm or something like that, we have to lean on programs that are able to help us and help the community members that we want to be serving. So, for example, at our farmers market, Richland Park Farmers Market, the 2020 pandemic, it made the farmers market go gangbusters. And so the person who owns the farmers market, Hank Delvin of Delvin Farms, he started giving $100 back to the market every week. And so we have a volunteer go around. Her name's Emily Mann. And she basically has $100 of tokens that she goes and spends with farmers. And all of that food gets donated to the community fridge. The Bells Bend Conservation Corridor, that's another really cool, tiny nonprofit that serves Bells Bend. So Bells Bend, for those who aren't familiar, is the last agriculturally zoned land in Davidson County. And the people who live there really want to see that land preserved, and they want to see it stay agricultural. And so their group raises money. And one thing that they do with their money is they buy food from farms in that area and then donate it to the local pantry that could, which is a food pantry. And I think that's a really creative way to not only be supporting small organic farmers, but also giving high quality, local, nutritious, organically grown food to people who need it. So I would really love to see more programs like that. I think people who are resourced, if money is something that you have to give, if that's something you've been able to make in your life, if you can share those resources, support farmers doing good work, and also support community members who need that nutritious food. I would just love to see more of that happening. I don't think it should entirely fall upon farmers to be donating and giving away their food. I mean, I think they absolutely could. Farmers already do that. We constantly give away seconds and stuff like that. But everybody should have access to the firsts, the best carrots and the best lettuce in the springtime. And that's going to happen when we pool resources from all over Nashville. So I would love to see more of that sort of thing happening.
Shirley, can I just say that, like, I receive a lot of produce weekly from Bell's Bend. And like with the grant that they were able to secure, where they were able to like to purchase that and like send it back out, like I get the same type of produce. But we've really been trying to grow. I purchase from local farms. I have a line item budget for it. And my struggle has always been getting farmers to communicate back to me. So like, I'm always like, I'll buy it. I'd rather buy it from you than anywhere else. I have the budget for it, but like trying to get farmers to give like fresh sheets or anything like that, or even call or text to be like, hey, I have this. Are you interested in it? I'd love to see how we could like better that communication, even if it was like another liaison like Nashville Grow, to be able to put other businesses and nonprofits like myself that have a line item. I know that it's probably like pennies on a dollar, but when you look at like what happens after a farmer's market and you have all this stuff left over, like I'm willing to buy those types of things and wanting to make those types of connections so that I can use the money on my line item. Because I reserve a portion. Because of like our farmers in the Grow Together program weren't able to sell to restaurants when restaurants weren't open. I just was like, okay, so I'm going to rework my budget. And I was like, how much do you need to sell so they can have income coming in? And I don't care what it is. I've allotted like $250 a week. So just give it to me. I don't care what it is. So like trying to figure out different ways that we can make purchases that way where farmers aren't like, oh, I can't meet this quota of giving them 20 pounds of carrots. So therefore I can't sell it to them and I can't give it to them. Like I'm trying to change the way it looks to be like, I'm willing to buy $250 a week from you. Don't care what the product is. Don't care about the amount. So I'm really interested to talk to you more after this, Carolyn, so that we can, I'm trying to put that together because that's something that I feel like is handicapped because they feel like, well, I can't meet this threshold. So therefore I'm not even going to attempt. But I think it's opportunities out there for us, like different partners as well, to be like $125 a week. Great. And that's guaranteed income. I know it's not a lot, but that's guaranteed income that, like if we can get other businesses and other communities involved in that I think that it would provide some stability.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That's what the Bells Bend Conservation Corridor does, is they just say, if you have a bunch of extra lettuce that you need to unload this week, we can buy that from you. And that's really useful to have that flexibility. And I know when I've talked to the Food Project in the past about their buying programs, it's so cool. And my farm is a half acre. So I've felt intimidated by the production needed and thought like, oh, this isn't for me. This is for a larger farm. But that's great to know you guys are kind of rethinking that a little bit. And I'd love to talk more about it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely hear that call to action. And that kind of reminds me of Nashville Grown. We've been mentioning Nashville Grown. They're a nonprofit. They help connect farmers' food to restaurants. And they have they do production coordinating. So they're like doing exactly what Bianca is talking about, is they're being that middle person of communication. And it would be, yeah, and actually in the 2015 Metro Nashville assessment that was done, looking at Nashville's food system, that was one of the key recommendations was we need a coordinator to help facilitate that communication between farmers and people that want to supply. And it's incredible that the Nashville Food Project has a budget, right? Like other big institutions, it's too easy to just order from Cisco or some other large, so we have some incredible resources in Nashville. I hope that we can, plug these little gaps in. That wasn't a question, but does anyone have anything that they want to add on to what I just said? There's been a lot of like head shaking, so I feel like we're all on the same page with that. Okay, I wanted to just touch on infrastructure. I am sorry if I didn't put this question on there, but I wonder, are there, as a small farmer, would it be helpful? And is that something do we know of places that small farmers can take their produce? I mean, the Nashville Food Project, you have commercial kitchen, you're doing it, everything, you're using the produce, but it seems like that is something that Nashville is missing, is places for farmers to just bring food.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been on my mind a lot recently, especially in 2020 with the pandemic. There were articles about how people who raise animals weren't able to process those animals on time. You heard horror stories about animals just being killed and buried because the farmers didn't have a way to literally have the meat slaughtered and processed. And that's just insane. We have huge bottlenecks in our infrastructure system in this country. And, in Tennessee, I think that there is like one cannery in West Tennessee. And this is a huge problem because all of our food is coming from outside of this region. I mean, we live in such a fertile state. And to think that the fertile land is being used to grow GMO soybeans and corn and grain and whatever. And that's getting like shipped to China and processed and then shipped elsewhere and fed to, it's just this crazy system that we have set up, and it doesn't make any sense. And it's not going to last for too much longer because of climate change. We just aren't going to be able to sustain this. It's entirely reliant upon fossil fuels that are cheap now, but they're not going to be cheap for too much longer. So it is imperative that Tennessee and Middle Tennessee start developing food infrastructure programs. We need slaughterhouses, we need canneries, we need mills. And it's important that they're cooperatively owned by their communities because that makes a more sustainable system. We don't need slaughterhouses that are owned out of state where profits are going out of state. We need facilities where people can make a decent wage and have a say in their workspace. That is true sustainability. And what we have set up now just isn't. Farmers like me, I grow a lot of the, tomatoes and summer squash and stuff like that, and I can move everything at the farmer's market. But you start looking at farmers like Jeff Poppen or Bell's Bend Farm, farms that are scaled a little bit bigger, 5+ acres. And you can produce a lot of food on farms like that, but they need places to put all that food that they can produce and preserve it. And we need to be able to do that locally. I mean, there's no reason that, Jeff Poppen shouldn't be able to use every single potato that he has. So I would love to see our state invest in infrastructure programs like that. I think they're going to be really necessary in 10, 15 years when we just can't import our food anymore.
That's shocking that there's only one cannery.
I mean, you should fact check me on that, but
still, it's obviously close. I mean,
yeah,
I think there might be two. I just learned of another one in East Tennessee maybe, but yeah, that's shocking too. Or somewhere, it's a low number like that. Yeah, I'm all with you, everything that you just said. So you're touching on this, like our current mass industrial scale food system. We're relying on mass production and mass distribution. And like you're saying, Caroline, that's obviously not sustainable. I wondered if we could just like kind of go through each person and share kind of what vision do you have for a more localized regional food network, and how could that help improve food security, but more than food security, like actually building relationships with the food, you know what I mean, like not just food security, but food sovereignty. Does anybody have, like kind of what is the role of our local food system in helping achieve that goal?
Well, one thing that occurred to me just during this conversation is, right after the tornado, we lost a lot of trees. And there was really good organization in this city through nonprofits to help replant those trees and repopulate all the trees. And it was really organized, and there were tons of volunteers, probably because it's really happy, life affirming work to go around and help plant trees. I wonder if we could have that kind of support with doing local community gardening. Every little neighborhood could have a place where people could go, if it's on the weekends or after work or whatever, but you can grow a lot of food in a community garden. If there was some kind of, support that you could have, hey, we need help with this, like, whether it's through Metro or through a nonprofit, I think that would be a really great thing when people would love it. And, we've talked a lot about all the immigrants that are here. People in other countries grow a lot of their own food. They're not growing all their own food, but people have gardens, people have front yard gardens, backyard gardens all around the world. And I think people would love some support in being able to do that in their own neighborhoods. I know for myself, I have a little front yard garden, and I have been able to harvest from it all year round. Right now I have kale and beets and carrots, and it's really nice to just, be able to go pick that healthy stuff. And it's obviously affordable. I mean, you have to pay for the seeds, but once you have it, you have it. And that could be really nice for families all throughout the city.
I mean, from my perspective, speaking as a city employee, the city has plans for lots of different things, from transit to affordable housing to healthcare to even the tree program has legislation around it and got funding from the city. It would be great if the city could step in or work with nonprofits and farmers and restaurants and everybody that's within the food system to start saying, let's develop something together that would make sense for everybody, that would create this economy of food that benefits, the communities that we can embed food in, to the farmers who sell the food to the community, to the nonprofits that do a lot of the work. Because and Bianca can speak to this, that, especially when the pandemic started, nonprofits had to take on the majority of that extra need and that extra urgency to fill in those gaps. A lot of nonprofits that maybe had a foot in food or part of their services were food took on, it became a huge part of their nonprofit work, and the funding and the donations that they got just went to food. And I'm sure Food Project ended up getting more partners, meal partners, and even more need from the partners that they already had. And so it would be, to me, great if the city could say, this is a priority. We need to figure out a way forward together to address the food system, so that if we have another pandemic, or just in general, really, we're not leaning on systems that also don't work outside of Nashville, that we have a system here that could potentially serve the community and the farmers without sort of these emergency measures, if you will.
I totally agree with that.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, yeah, Mark, of course. And yes, we should support the local farmers. I what Caroline's doing has such an important role. And yeah, if there were an institutionalized way to also, make sure that those people that are running small farms around Nashville, that they also get supported, because they're so valuable. We need that land. We need that food being grown locally. So yeah, part of the plan would be, of course, not just community gardens being supported, but local farmers knowing that they have a steady income and support would be ideal too. So go ahead, Bianca.
I was gonna say, like yesterday, I participated in a reflective dialogue with Urban Green Lab, and I think these are the conversations that, with like the local food summit and Urban Green Lab, that like need to be had, and like jumping on it now, because we're seeing, especially with the pandemic, it's revealing those gaps and the flaws in the system. We always known they were there, but it became more prevalent when we were faced with what we were. So I think I would love to be in a world or envision where like our government and our leadership and our legislative roles like actually makes that investment. We see like Nashville especially is like one of the new it cities. And it is forever developing. Like, I'm a Nashville native. That's kind of like unheard of now. But like, this is a different Nashville than where I grew up. And seeing how fast the city is developing and blossoming, and then you're seeing where the gaps actually are in the communities and the priorities that are getting left behind. So we're making like this investment in like large corporations coming here, and but we're not making the investment in as much so the communities that are already here to create sustainable practices. So I really would love to see that happening more. I think these conversations that we're having, they're imperative to making that happen and like shining that spotlight. Because if we have more projects and more things where like the Nashville Food Project is using metro land, it's lots of metro land that's not being used. But instead of it going to developers and other instances, it should be going to communities and farmers so that they can not have to pay for that land that's already paid for, and support the communities and support themselves. Those are the kind of networks that I feel like we should be evolving towards. And I think the conversations that we're having make me feel like we are evolving towards that, looking at other ways to make those investments. Because if we don't invest in our local farmers and communities, as well as infrastructure and green space, we're gonna be left out in the cold. We won't have a way to sustain anything. We'll be totally reliant upon, the other powers that be. So I'm really encouraged and hopeful about these conversations, because for a long time it was like small pockets and small groups of people that were doing the work or involved. You see, like with the mayor's initiative, like pulling in these restaurants to help support like pandemic and tornado food support. Like that was a big deal. But now that we've kind of come out of emergency mode, what happens then? Because like now I'm getting all those requests again for food partners that like they were getting the meals from the mayor's thing with all the restaurants, but as restaurants started opening, they no longer could do that. So, those are the gaps. So, we can continue that conversation without us like, it being emergency and falling off the, face of the earth until it's another emergency response needed.
Yeah, I mean, everything you guys just said is dead on to me. I think having a more localized food system is going to take all of this, everything that you guys just said, and even more. I think the one thing that we've all sort of touched on, but haven't really exactly hit on yet, is the education component of having a more localized food system. And, Bianca, at the Nashville Food Project, when you are introducing people to foods that they haven't had before or prepared in a way that they haven't had before, that's a form of education. When people are, join a community garden and meet their neighbors and, grow food in that way, that's an educational experience. When people go to the local food summit, that's obviously an educational experience. And I think that teaching people to love food and to respect food, and that it is adventurous and fun, I think that's a really powerful tool to implement change in our system. So I also hope to see more education. Just kind of the work that I think all of us are doing is great work, and hope it continues.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that you brought up that education part, Caroline. I think that giving people tools and access to learn how to cook with this food, is huge. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Thank you so much for all of your work. We've hit an hour, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I feel like we could just talk. I could listen to you all talk all day, but we won't do that. But I feel like a lot of great insights came out of this conversation. And I look forward to working with all of you in the future on these topics that we discussed today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right, y'all have a great rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you. Wow. I don't know about you, but I gleaned a lot from that discussion. Conversations like these are what the Tennessee Local Food Summit is all about. We hope you enjoyed this virtual symposium, and we look forward to gathering together again at future Food Summit events, hopefully in person.